What's different about Guangzhou's Hutongs compared to Beijing? Well, one thing you'll notice is that it's a lot older looking, not quite as clean and tidy, much narrower in terms of you might be able to get a car down here, but there'd be no two-lane traffic. And a lot of these businesses are just old school mom and pop shops. There's not much commercial interest expanding into Guangzhou's labyrinth of Hutong alleys. It's really just more of how it's always kind of been, where people rent out spaces like this, and in some cases they live up above this canopy into the apartments and houses on top, and they come down and they actually have a small business, and they'll sell things like food, of course, clothing. Sometimes they'll even do laundry. Like in there, that's a uniform laundry shop where they press uniforms for businesses and things of that nature. Sometimes a coffee shop or two, interesting little cafe or bar, which is what is interesting about Beijing's Hutongs, is that like I showed you in the previous video, it's one of the few places you might be able to go and get legitimate French food, or really good Vietnamese noodles, or things of that nature, because it's entrepreneurs that take the risk. The big companies that have the big money to back businesses, they don't take risks like that. They open up sure things in shopping malls and bigger storefronts. So as these Hutongs get narrower, they become more interesting and perhaps more dangerous. Never are you going to feel unsafe in Beijing's alleys. However, down in Canton, it's a whole different story. I've often said that if you want to see the real China, the real old China, down and dirty, go to the south. And with that, of course, comes some risk, because crime is much more rampant down here than it is in the north. Basically, the further away you get from Beijing, the more lawlessness and more wide open things are. You don't have to look very far into the past to figure that out. The one-time mayor and government strongman Bo Lai from Chongqing, he had his own cottage industries in Chongqing, away from the eye of Beijing, had built up and consolidated a great deal of power politically within the Communist Party, and was making a serious run at being perhaps the next chairman of the Communist Party, until, of course, Xi Jinping shut his faction down, put everybody on house arrest, and the rest, as you can say, is history. So Bo Lai on house arrest in prison for the rest of his life, on suicide watch after many attempts. So that's kind of it, really. The further away you go from Beijing, more lawlessness it gets. In my opinion, the more interesting it gets if you're a foreigner. But the danger is there. Unlike what's happening in Beijing, these Hutongs in Guangzhou are never going to change. It's way too old. There's too many of them. It's too vast. And this city is just way too set in its ways. I mean, what you see here is really old. No efforts to modernize it, update it. Once in a while you'll see a cop shop like this stuck down in these alleys, and that's just to keep the order and to keep some kind of eye on what's going on, which really aggravates me. Eye in the sky everywhere. But yeah, I would say that these things are never going to get gentrified. It's just way too old school, and there's not a lot of investment money to do so. It's really kind of how it is. They're just stuck in their traditions here. This is old school China. If you want to see the real China, I always said to go south to Canton, because Unlike the north, they didn't get invaded by Mongols, by the Japanese, occupied by other tribes, so to speak. This place down south remained pretty much the same for thousands of years. Their traditions, their language or culture, and their style just never got changed by anybody else. It's almost like it would be too difficult to do that because they're so set in their ways. Cantonese people, Guangzhou city people, they seem a little bit mean when you meet them, a little bit standoffish, a little bit hard on the outside, but that's just their nature. They're not as curious as people in other parts of China with foreigners, and that's just how it is down here. I don't know if it's the weather, the culture, or the untrustfulness. The crime is higher, like I said. The gangs have a powerful presence down here, and so I think that those dynamics just factor into people not really being trustworthy of each other. So, but there are some charm. I mean, you have some buildings down here that are very charming. There are occasional tea houses you can dive into that will give you a feel of how things were, hundreds and even thousands of years ago. Very interesting. Any remaining independent brothels that are not incorporated into a massage parlor or a hotel spa are usually to be found in these hutongs. And since they're, completely rogue and unregulated and fly by night, it may be open one week and close the next. You never know. It's a place where you can get rolled. If you're a John that likes that kind of thing, you better be cautious about it because in many cases the business is unknown. It's unmarked, unregulated. So if you go in there with a intent to have a rendezvous with a pretty lady, you may come out with an empty wallet or worse. People in the south, especially in Guangzhou, they always have a kind of a scowl on their face. You don't get many people coming up to you and just smiling. Young and old, they all have this scowl as they're going about their daily routine. It's probably because they're working their tail off, and it gets hotter than hell down here. But about the opium dens. Now, opium dens used to be as common as a convenience store is today, many years ago. When that got cracked down, of course, the opium dens went underground, and as far as I know, from what I hear on the street, there are still opium dens. The tradition of smoking opium never really went totally away. It's still an underground thing, but if you're going to find an opium den, it would be in these hutongs. It's just that you're taking a tremendous risk by going in and trying to check it out, especially if you're a foreigner. The taboo is just too much, and that's the kind of place that if you ever did stumble upon an opium den and you ever did partake and indulge just for the experience of it, that is a place where you could wake up with a missing kidney, for real. So be careful. That's one of the taboos of China. You don't want to delve too far in it. That anything political, of course, is also taboo. So you do that with your own risk. And but it would be an interesting book. If someone could research it well, update it, and find out how the counterculture is working today, that would be a great book to release. It's just that the research would be an issue, and the dangers of going into the drug-laden underworld subculture of China is way too dangerous for a foreigner. That is stuff that could get the proprietor of the opium den executed. You won't get jail time or execution for consuming illegal drugs in China. But if you are distributing drugs or participating in any distributorship of narcotics, that's instant death sentence. And a few years back there was a British guy that got exactly that. So just a word for the wise.